Welcome. Today's the 27th of October 2021, and this week's Sedra is Chayei Sara, and we talk about the life of Sara, and we learn about Rifka in the story. She meets Avraham's servant. So today I'm going to talk about Rifka, and the title is A Rose Among Thorns. So at the beginning of the Sedra, we see that Sara dies. And so, source 1 on your sheet, Vayihiyu Chayei Sara me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei Chayei Sara. These are the years of Sarah's life, 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years, the years of Sarah's life. So Rashi famously asks on this question, why can't you just say 127 years? Why do you have to say 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years? Michelle looks like she knows, so you can work on it.
I was going to ask you the same
question.
Yes.
I'm a bit of confusion on this because what are you talking about the span of a year? Is it a year as we take it, or is it so many months? Because often when you read the Bible, someone dies at 800 years, someone dies at 900 years. This is ridiculous. It's so nice.
You are correct that sometimes the phrase, let's say a day, is not necessarily a day, or what is a day of creation. We understand it to mean that Sarah was 127 years old. That's what it's understood to mean. No one comments differently, but you are correct that not always the time is written like that. But the famous question is, why does it have to say, years, the years of her life? What is that all about? So Rashi says two things. Anybody wants to? Deborah, remember?
The reason he says 100 years and 20 years and 7 years is the 7 years she was as pure as a 7-year-old child, as innocent as a 7-year-old child, maybe as beautiful as a 20-year-old child. And I can't remember why.
Right, so Rashi, you're quoting Rashi there. So the question is why? Because the question is, why is there a midrash that tells us that? So I think the idea behind that is that in a person has different stages of life. So for example, the innocence of youth. So when you move on a stage and you get to be 20, you somehow lose that innocence, or you lose that, let's say when you're 20, you're invigorated and enthusiastic and you think to yourself, I can do anything, and you believe you can achieve anything. When you get to be a little bit older, you're like, nah, you get a bit more cynical. So I heard it said, I think Rabbi Farhi said it once, that she held on to the innocence of youth and the enthusiasm of early adulthood. Okay, I once saw. Sorry, you going to say something?
No, I was going to say, is it also that because she didn't have a child, when she had Isaac, she was nearly 100, and that was almost a new
phase in her life.
Yes.
By the way, there was a woman, an Indian woman, who had a baby. She was 65. I read in the paper last week. Interesting. I must remember to write that down for myself because it's just so fascinating for this. Let me just not lose my train of thought. She was 100 years, so she held on to, her enthusiasm. Many years ago, my mum bought me and my sisters tickets to see a play called Three Tall Women. That was written by Edward Albee, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if anybody's seen it. And the reason why Mum bought us tickets is it was, I think it was with Frances de la Tour, Maggie Smith, and did you see it? And it's just the most incredible play. And it's basically an old lady who is like basically on her deathbed babbling about her life. And you can see the reactions that her, say, 40, 50-year-old nurse has and thinks to herself, I'm not going to be like that when I'm, 85 or whatever. And then there's like a 25-year-old lawyer or something, and you can see how they treat her and how they react to her. And then the same three actresses play the same woman throughout her life. It's like she talks to her 25-year-old self, talks to her 50-year-old self. I can't explain it, but if it's ever on, I definitely recommend you see it. And it's just very interesting that, let's say, for example, the 25-year-old says something like, I'm only ever going to marry the person, I'm only going to marry for love. And then the 50-year-old goes, you idiot. Of course we loved Jeremy, and then, that wasn't viable, that was never going to work out, so we married Michael, or whatever his name is. And then she's like, I'm never going to forgive my child. The 50-year-old saying, I'm never going to forgive my child. And the 70-year-old says, of course you're going to forgive him. Of course we forgave him. And how, so interesting. But going back to Chayei Sara, her life was in different stages. And what can we learn from it? We noticed, I'm happy that Michelle noticed the word years was in there. But what can we learn? What is the significance? And that if people can carry on the innocence or the enthusiasm of, the dreamer of a 20-year-old who I believe I can achieve anything. And for later on, maybe the experience of life, or maybe when she was 20, she behaved like she was someone who had the experience of someone who was much older. Rashi also gives another opinion, and I brought his second opinion today. It's on source 2. Kulon shovin latova. They were all equally good. Now, I find that quite strange because she obviously yearned for a child and she didn't have a child until she was much, much older. So I struggle with that. But obviously when Rashi gives 2 answers, he's not so satisfied with either of them. But again, we can learn something from them. And perhaps what we can learn is that even when things are harder, it's a very big challenge. But to say to ourselves, we can't change what has happened, but we can change our reaction, or we can try our best to cope with it. So, someone who, someone catches COVID, they might say to themselves, this is terrible, 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 I'm stuck, I can't get out. But then you can think to yourself, hey, I can go to Israel now and I don't need to have my 3rd vaccine. You can look at it in a positive way if possible. Sometimes it isn't always so easy to look at things so positively. So I find that a bit of a challenge, what Rashi's second comment is. And Sarah dies, and this is Posuk base. Vatomos Sarah b'Kiryas Arba hi Chevron. She dies in Kiryas Arba, which is known as Chevron, in the land of Canaan. Vayovo Avram lispot Sarah v'livkosa. And Avraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Now, in the actual Sefer Torah, and I've highlighted this, I think it came out on your sheet in yellow, there's a tiny little kaf. So it's very interesting. Sometimes in the Torah, the letter, it's almost like a small, like a shrunk letter. So it's like when I think about the Sefer Torah and the Sofer writes it out. Now we think about typing, so we can make the font size. We can make the font size smaller. So the question is, why is the kaf very small? And the Baal HaTurim says something which I find really difficult, and I don't have an answer, but I wanted to bring it because it's what the Baal HaTurim says, and I'm shocked, and I don't have an answer for it. Maybe one of you can say what you think it means, but I don't like it one tiny bit. And he says, source 4, the kaf katana, there's a small kaf, shelo bacha ela ma'at, he didn't cry a lot because she died, lefi Shezakena Haisa, because she was old. So she was already, she'd lived her life, so it wasn't a tragedy. Okay, I find that a bit of troubling, and I just don't think anybody can ever...
I don't.
Oh, you don't find that troubling?
No, I don't, because it is, I think it's true. If someone dies who's lived like my father died when he was 95, of course, he's always my father, and it was, very upsetting, but it wasn't like a tragedy. It was the natural passing of life.
Mm. But were the circumstances where she died quite upsetting, because he took Isaac away to sacrifice him, and during that time she was so upset, that's when she died.
Okay,
so then he came back and she had died. So actually it was quite a sad situation.
The Torah the words of the Torah don't exactly tell us that.
Okay.
What you're saying is from the Midrash, that the idea is that she heard that he had died, or maybe that the Satan came over and showed her and said to her, oh, your husband is offering up your son, and then she died from the shock. There is the Midrash like that, but I don't believe that in the Pesukim that we see that. And we can't tell the time. We don't see the time. What you're ahead of yourself, because you already know what the Midrash says. So that's amazing. But I like to try and look at the actual words and then see what the rabbis say, but first look at the actual words. So thank you very much, Fanny, for sharing that. I once watched a film it's a Disney film, another one that I recommend, called Tuck Everlasting. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. Write it down, because I'm telling you now, it's the most amazing film. And it's about a boy who lives, and his family have drunk from a fountain of youth that they never die. Have you seen it?
My daughter's seen it and raved about it. She said she's expecting it to be quite a light-hearted Disney film. She said she spent half of it in tears because it was so emotionally...
It's very emotional. Okay, so the story goes like this. It's really interesting. It's supposed to be a Disney film, but obviously for adults, it's Tuck T-U-C-K, Tuck Everlasting. Okay, I watched it many years ago. It's just come to my... I wasn't even going to speak about it. It's just come to my head in response to what Fanny said. So this boy lives, but he knows he can never die because he's got no way to die, because he's drunk from this eternal life, elixir of life. And he meets a girlfriend, I think her name was Winifred, and he tells her, he gets in trouble with the police, but he has to run away. But he can run away for 100 years and then come back because he has drunk from this elixir of life. And 100 years later, no one's going to know who he is. And he's stuck as a 20-year-old. So he's got the whole of his life. I don't want to ruin it for you, but basically, the question is whether or not the girlfriend drinks from this fountain of youth, because would a person actually want to live forever? So we believe that we have eternal life in the world to come, but would a person really, really, really want to live forever? Like, I don't know, I'd quite like to have a lifetime where I don't have to ever clear up or worry about making supper. You know, I'm not being funny. I'm just saying is I'm hoping that the world to come is not, you know, you might think that's funny, but I'm saying is, so if you have time to watch that film, it's very, very moving, because the girl goes to see his parents who are stuck as 50-year-olds and they can't ever change. And then, like, is that called living if you never... you've never got a way out. You never can leave. It's, I don't know. So watch that film, and just quite interesting. Sorry, that's a little digression, which Fanny made me think about. There is another idea, is that Sarah, when she was born, her name was not Sarah. I mean, there is a midrash which says her name was Yisca, but she was originally named Sarai. So look at source 5. And Hashem said to Abraham, Sarai ishtacha lo tikra es shema Sarai. Do not call her name Sarai anymore. Ki Sarah shemo. She is now going to be called Sarah. So there is this idea that if God forbid if a person's ill, that we add a name to the person's, let's say they might, if it's a boy, Rafael or Chaya for a girl, something like that, because your name is your purpose, and perhaps her name had changed and she had a different purpose in life, and thereafter that she was going to have children. But look what Rashi says on that pasuk, that her name changes from Sarai to Sarah. And Rashi says, source 6, Demashma Sarai, like, it means my princess. Sar is a noble person. Interestingly, C-Z-A-R, Sar is sort of a similar word. Her name is Sarai. Li velo la'acherim. Originally, she was a princess. Now, in Hebrew, the word, let's say, yad is hand, yadi is my hand. Okay? So, Sar, prince, Sarai, my princess. The possessive noun for Avraham, mine, and nobody else's. But then her name was going to become Sarah. Stam Shema, Shetehei Sarah al Kol. She is now going to move from being my personal princess, mine as in Avraham's princess. She becomes the princess to everybody. She becomes almost like the national princess, or, you know, think like Lady Diana. She might have been a person who could be a school teacher. When she became Charles's fiancée girlfriend, she could not carry on working in a school. Although I think things are changing. Say, for example, William managed to get to a university, and separate issue, but just have an idea of what it is. So we see that Sarah became Sarai, my princess, Avraham's princess, personal princess, became Sarah. So when she died, Avraham mourned her. And did he mourn her as Sarai, my personal princess, or Sarah, the national figure, the public persona that she was? So Rab Simcha Bunim Sofer, who passed away in 1906 in Pressburg, explained that when Sarah died, Avraham must have felt great personal loss. It was his wife, his personal, his private persona felt personal loss. Yet he put that in the background, and his hesped, his eulogy, was about Sarah, the public persona. The loss to society that resulted from her death, not the inner pain that he felt. So he sort of like deflated his own personal loss and didn't share it when he gave a hesped in front of the community. And I think...
Do we know at which point in her life that her name changed?
Before she had Yitzchak.
So she was older, she was already...
Yeah, 90,
right.
Coming up to 90. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs passed away, and his yahrzeit is this week. And although he passed away Shabbos Parshas Vayera, this year it's Parshas Chayei Sarah. And many people have read his books and been inspired by Rabbi Sachs, the public personality, the writer and the thinker. Gila Sachs, when she spoke at her father's funeral, she spoke about her father being her father as opposed to being the public personality. And Dayan Binstock, when he spoke at the funeral, he said that Rabbi Sachs had once told him, you can listen on YouTube if you go on the Rabbi Sachs page, he said, and I'm going to quote, "When I die, I do not want to be remembered as the man who wrote lots of books. I do not want to be remembered as the man who was the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth. I want to be remembered as the man who gave out sweets to children in shul." And I think the fact that it's this week, Chayei Sara, and it's about the eulogy of Sara, that it falls out this year, that it's the first yahrzeit of Rabbi Sachs, I think that sometimes people could possibly get caught up in big accomplishments, and it's fantastic if someone becomes a member of the House of Lords or invents something which is really helpful. But there's also the private personality, the mum, the dad, the brother, the sister, the child. It's not just, life is not only about the public performance, it's about the personal, the private, the tiny, going round, phoning someone who you haven't seen for a while. That makes people great. I don't want to say more than someone who writes loads of books, but it's also about the sensitivity that people show. And I think that maybe that little cuff is like holding back Avraham's holding back his own personal grief on a personal level, and just thinking to himself, that's my wife on a micro level. She was the one who put my slippers next to my bed, or whatever it is, and just kept that. When he gave the public eulogy for Sara, he said, I'm going to hold back my own personal private grief. And I think that when we talk about Lord Jonathan Sachs, and may his neshama have an aliyah, and all the learning that's gone on taking place this week, that we should think also of him as great as he was as a giant of a man. He was also, a great father and a husband and a son, but also in our own lives. If somebody isn't a public personality, there are lots of people quietly going about their own business, doing good, being nice to their friends, being respectful to their kids, making time for their parents, etc., etc. And I think that little cuff and the idea that Sarah was a public and a private personality is just something we can learn from this week's Sedra. So that's the first idea I wanted to share with you, and I can see that.
Why
Yeah.
the cuff?
Oh, I don't know why the cuff. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm going to look into that, Deborah.
Thank you.
I didn't look that up. Good question. You mean as opposed to any other letter? I think that I did see a medrash somewhere which says that if you read it as le bita, if you take that letter away, it could be maybe his house, or maybe they had a daughter. I read something about that. I'll just check. I'll check what it was. I definitely read one of the Mefarshim like that. So we don't have so much time, because I was really going to talk about Rivka, so we'll try and move a little bit faster. So we have this story where Avraham says, right, now's the time. My son Yitzchak is 37 years old. Post the Akedah, he needs to find a wife. And so Avraham is like, no way, I'm not going to let my son marry someone from the daughter of Canaan. So he sends his trusted servant, who has not got a name in the story. Well, the Midrash tells us his name's Eliezer. Only once it says Damesek Eliezer in the story, not in this story, but it tells us that Avram had his servant called Eliezer. So excuse me if I use the word Eliezer, but it's his trusted camels. Now, Eliezer, I'm going to tell you, the servant, right? He doesn't know what to do and who to choose, and how's he going to do this? So he makes a sort of he prays to God, and he says to God, listen, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to make a little test, and there's a whole load of ideas about whether or not he should have made the test, but let's look at source 7. This is Bereshis Kaf Daled Yud Daled, and he says, V'haya ha'na'ara asher oma eleha hatino kadech ve'eshter. Let the maiden who I say to her, please, can you give me your jug, and can I have a drink? And she replies, and she replies, don't worry, have a drink, sir, and I'm going to give water to all your camels. Let that one be the person who you've decreed should marry your servant Yitzchak. So he's made this test. What happens when we meet Rivka? Now, this is a very interesting story, so we can't go into too much detail, but I've just picked out one idea that I'd like to share with you that I think is very meaningful. First of all, Rivka was a person who went above and beyond. Going above and beyond, apparently a camel can drink lots and lots of water, and they can go many days without water, but when you need to drink and to make them feel satisfied, it takes a lot of water. So don't think turning on a tap or get a bottle, think going to the well, drawing up the water, dragging it, putting it in the trough, going back to the well, whatever. When we see Rivka acting in the story, there are loads of words in Hebrew. Vatamaher, she hurried. Vatorot, and she ran. Interesting side issue, very similar to Avraham in last week's story, chapter 18, where he's got the angels who come, he hurries and he runs, and those are all held to his credit. So we see that Rivka is a person who moves about with enthusiasm and alacrity. And here's what she says when he comes along and says, he comes along and says, give me a drink. Look what she says. So source 8 on the sheet. This is Bereshis Kaf Dalad Yud Ches and Yud Tes. Let's see, it's the bottom of page 1. Vatomer, and she said, this is Rivka saying, Shetei Adoni, drink my master. Vatamahe vatered kada al yoda vatashkehu. And she hurried and she lowered her pitcher, her jug, on her hand, and he drank. And she gave him to drink. Vatachal lahashkoso. And when he had finished drinking, when he had drunk enough, Vatomer, and she said, Gam legamalecha eshav, I will also draw for your camels, ad im kilu lishtos, until they have finished drinking. Now you've got it on the same paper, so look at the differences between 7 and 8. What does he say? This is my test, this is what I expect her to say. And what does she actually say?
She said that she will give the camels water to drink until they're finished.
Yes, that's very nice. That means that's over and above. Lovely.
Yeah.
So he says, does anyone else want to speak, Madeline? Oh, you can't see. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I've read the punchline. I didn't know that.
Okay.
One, they're saying it's just a copy. 8 is a copy of 7. He says he lowered.
She calls him a master in the second one.
Right. Okay.
Well, she lowers
So
her.
she makes a pause between the drink
And then the camel.
and the camels.
Okay. So we'll see on 7. He says, I'm going to ask her, and she's going to say, Shetei v'gam gamalech ha ashker. Drink, and I'm also going to give your camels to drink. What does she do? She says, Shetei Adoni. She says, drink, my master. Then she ran to get the water and she gave him to drink. When he finished drinking, she said, Gam gamalecha eshav. I will now give your camels to drink. So he put it all in one group. She split it up. So the question is, why? So the Or HaChaim, source 9, we won't have time to look at it in Hebrew inside, but you can look at it at your leisure. The reason that Rivka didn't add, I will also give your camels water, immediately was done on purpose. She specifically did that on purpose. Because had she said, drink and I'm also going to give your camels water, Eliezer, or the servant, might have felt, hold on a minute, she's going to have to now draw water for loads of camels. So I don't really want to make her give me loads of water, because what's going to happen is she's then going to feel, I'm going to tie her out by just me drinking. I know that she's still got that work ahead of her, so I'm not going to drink, I'm going to hold back and not drink enough. What did she do? She said, drink. He drank, until it says, and he finished his drinking. He drank as much as he wanted. He didn't know what she was going to do next. Once he'd drunk as much as he wanted, she showed tremendous sensitivity to say to him, I don't want you to hold back what you want. You know, sometimes you go to a dinner party and the person's like, no, it's fine. You want to, don't take all the food because you want other people to have it. Maybe Eliezer wouldn't have drunk what he wanted. So sensitive that you see that Or Chaim's looking so carefully at the words in the verses and what it can mean for us. If you look at source 10, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, the Haksava Kabbalah, he says something completely different. She didn't want to say a sentence like, I'm going to give you and the camels water, like you get grouped together with the camels. So it's sort of like saying like, I'm going to get you and the pigs water. It's sort of like, you're not an animal, you are your own person, and the camels are a separate entity. I'm not grouping you all together. You're not an animal, you're a human being, and I'm going to show you dignity. And she didn't equate him in any way. She didn't even group him in the sentence with animals. So we see the Or Chaim, they both noticed the difference. And one is that she cared about his physical well-being, that he should drink enough. And the other one says she cared about his emotional well-being, that he shouldn't sort of add him together, that he was like an animal. That's so interesting. This tiny little difference in the text has such an interesting nuance. Rifka then goes into her house, and then we meet her brother Lovon, who is the most interesting character. So that's why I called the title of today's shir A Rose Among Thorns. So the Midrash is not happy about Lovon. Can't really see what he does so badly, so clearly in the text. Let's see how the story picks up with Lovon, which is verse 29, source 11. It's almost at the end of page 2. So Rivka has a brother, Rivka ach ushemo Lovon, and Rivka has a brother whose name is Lovon. Interesting, Vayorotz Lovon runs. So we've said before, Abraham's really good, he's so enthusiastic. Rivka's so good, she's so enthusiastic. Lovon's running, is that enthusiastic? The Mefarshim aren't so happy about him running, okay? El ha'ish hachutza el ha'ayin, and he runs out to the spring, to the man. Vayhi kiros es hanezem ve'es hasmidim al yedei achoso, and it was when he saw the earrings, the nose rings, and the bracelets on his sister's arms. Where am I? Sham'o estavar divrei Rifka achosa. And when he heard what Rivka had said, Lamar saying, Ko daber elai ha'ish, the man told me such and such, Vayavo el ha'ish, and he went to the man, Vahine omed al hagamalim al ha'ayin, and he went to the man who was standing by the well with the camels. Vayomer, this is Lovon speaking. Vayomer, and he said, Bo, Baruch Hashem, blessed is Hashem, Lomo ta'amod bachutz. Why are you standing outside? Va'anochi pinisi habayis v'makom lagamalim. And I've emptied out the house, and I've got space for you, and I've got space for your camels. Vayovo ha'ish habayisa, and the man came into the house, vayafatach hagamalim, and he unloaded the camels. Vayiten teven umispo lagamalim, and he gave fodder to the food, to the straw, to the camels, umayim lirchot raglov, and water to wash his feet, v'ragle ha'anoshim asher ito. And Lovon is suddenly Mr. Hospitable, and he gives everything to the camels. Interesting, we see that he comes inside, and this is, I've just noticed it now, he cares about the camels before he cares about the man. I just noticed that now.
Yes.
No, I'm just saying as I prepared the shir, and I wasn't looking at something else, but I'm just saying as I'm speaking, I noticed it.
That actually
Zoom in on it, okay? I'm just saying
hits you first.
I'm sure the commentators have got lots of things to say about that he puts his things to there. So what does Rashi say about Vayoros? For Rivka, she's enthusiastic. For Avram, he's enthusiastic. Lovon, why is he running? Rashi, source 12. Lomorotz, Almarotz, where's he running to, and what's he running for? Would you know what he's running for? Look at the next verse. He's running because what did he see? He saw his sister's got beautiful jewelry, and he's thinking to himself, hello, I want some of that. That guy's obviously got loads of money, loads of jewelry. I'm running. And we see straight away he is got dollar signs flashing in his eyes like the cartoon characters. The Ramban, Nachmanides, passed away 1270, says, actually, it's difficult. being quite critical of Lavan. It looks on the surface that he's being very nice, he's being hospitable, he's saying Baruch Hashem, he's running. And the Rambam says, who is the man who girded the camels? Because if you look at verse 32, Vayavo ha'ish habaisa, and the man, it's in source 11, the bottom of source 11, the last 3 lines. Vayavo ha'ish habaisa, and the man came to the house, Vayapatach ha'hagmalim, and he unloaded the camels, or the camels were unloaded. Who did the unloading of the camels? Some of the Farshim say, he made Eliezer unload his own camels. He made himself, here I am, come in my house, come and everything. But meanwhile, when he said, come later, he said, get on with it yourself. So that a lot of the Mepharshim say that, but the Ramban says, no, you're being critical of Lavan for no reason. Eliezer is the man who entered the house. He ungirded the camels. This refers to Lavan, who acted ethically towards his guest, unharnessed the camels, gave them straw and fodder, and he also gave water to wash their feet. So we see there are different opinions. The ambiguity is there in the text, which gives us the opportunity to look at it in 2 different ways. Okay? But,
except there's, where it comes a bit loose is the last bit about Umayim. Because that would be more likely to be something that Lavan
that's the Ramban's approach. That's why the Ramban Nachmanides is not happy with the people who said he made Eliezer the servant unload everything himself. The commentators look at the words so carefully. Look back at source 11, and he says underneath the words Baruch Hashem, which are in did I make it loud? And I didn't. Okay. It's verse 31 and source 11. He says, "Va'anochi pinisi habayis umakom lagamalim," and I've cleared out the house and I've made loads of space. That would be me saying, "Of course you can stay over. I've made the beds. I've emptied the room. I've made my kids, double up so that there's plenty of space for you." What does Rashi say? Bereshis Rabbah, source 14, 67 tells us, Me avodas elilim. I've cleared out the house from my idols. So I know you're coming. I can sense you're like a holy guy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you in, but I'm it's sort of like I'm going to move the TV out the house. If a big rabbi is coming to give a shir in your house, you might move the TV out. Something like that. So there's loads of ideas about what Lavan does and what he doesn't do. But the word Lavan itself his name is Lavan, which is white. He's almost like he whitewashes the way he behaves. He hides his true feelings. At least Esav, we know what we're dealing with, or Yishmael, we know what we're up against. In fact, the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, he's written an essay saying Lavan is the ultimate anti-Semite because he pretends he's all friendly. Come in, I made space for you. But, and in fact, it's for another whole topic, is that when we read the Haggadah, we say, ulamad ma bikesh Lavan ha'arami la'asos liYaakov Avinu. Come and learn what Lavan wanted to do to Yaakov, because he was much worse than Paro. Paro only killed the boys, whereas Lavan wanted to la'akar es hakol, to uproot everybody. So in the last few minutes, I just want to talk about Rifka growing up in the influence of Lavan's house. And Lavan was her brother, her father was Besuel. So that Medrash tells us in Shir Asher and Rabbah, source 15 on the sheet, that Rivka is called a rose among thorns, a lily or a rose among thorns, which is a pasuk from Shir Asher and Rabbah, to teach us she came from Padan Aram. What does that mean? She was Lavan's sister. Her father was a trickster. Her brother was a trickster. And everyone where she came from, the whole place where she came from, everybody was an awful fraudster and a trickster, yet she came from their midst. We do know that later on, Rivka is somehow involved in a plan to, so to speak, deceive Yitzchak. So she perhaps used her ability to know what deceivers and tricksters are in her own life to do what she thought was right. She had a prophecy. That's another whole subject as well. But how is it somebody could grow up in Padan Aram and she managed to overcome the environment that she grew up in, where there's lots of Mefarshim what it is that Lavan did and how he tried to trick Yaakov later on with his money, and he tried to trick him with, first he married Leah, etc., etc. There's lots of things. The question I wanted to ask is a person got a natural ability and it's a little bit about what we spoke about last week, does a person have an innate nature that they have grown up in a place where everyone around them is like that? Or can we overcome nature with nurture? So Rivka, I think she tells us that we can. A person who's a rose among thorns, there can be roses among thorns. You can't blame anybody and anything. And I don't know if anybody's read the book by Rav Lau, Out of the Depth. He was he was 8 years old in Buchenwald. He came out, he didn't have his parents, but nevertheless, he literally became a prince amongst the nations. He didn't blame anybody. He didn't say, well, poor me, I don't have parents, poor me, I don't have any money, poor me, this happened. He picked himself up. He said, this is my life and I'm just going to get on with it. There are lots of examples of people in the world who've managed to overcome difficulties, who've come from difficult backgrounds. I don't want to talk about another film, but there's a film called Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio. It's the story of Frank Abagnale, who was he was a con man by the time he was 21, and he got caught and they didn't catch him. He could hack into systems, and he used his expertise to work for the FBI or something like that. And there are other people who have managed to overcome and turn their lives around. So Rifka managed to turn her own life around. And we know that in psychology there are ideas of nature and nurture, and twin studies where they have twins who are separated, like, do you have an innate natural ability or can you overcome? And I think Rivka shows us that she did overcome. And when she was about to leave with Avraham's servants, source 17, they called Rivka and they said to her, Haseilechi im ha'ish hazeh vatomer elech. They said, are you willing to go with this man? And she said, yes, I will go. And according to the Medrash, she could have been 3 or maybe even 13. How's that possible? By the way, this is the source why you cannot force someone to get married. You have to ask and say, are you willing to get married? And she says, yes, I am willing to get married. And Rashi says, she says, I will go. I'm going alone. Me'atzmi, I'm going by myself. Me, myself. I know I'm doing the right thing. I'm happy. I'm getting away from you and I'm going to get married. Va'af im einchem rotzim. Even if you don't want, I'm going. She said, it doesn't matter if you don't want the same thing to me. And I just want to finish off today with something that Lovon himself says to Rivka before she leaves. And this is something that we say to brides. The rabbi says this to the bride just before they get married. And it says, Vayavarchu es Rivka, they blessed Rivka, Vayomru, and they said to her, Achosenu at hayi la'alfei ravava. And that is what we say, Lovon's words, or the family's words. They say, you, my daughter, may you grow into thousands of myriads. And Rivka did become the mother to Yaakov and Esau, and then Yaakov became the father to the 12 tribes, and she became the great-grandmother to all of us who are sitting here today. So I think just to recap what we spoke about, Sarah's life, public and private, talking about Rabbi Sachs, individual contributions to life, and Rivka's response and showing sensitivity, whether she didn't want to stop him drinking what he wanted or whether she didn't want to group him together with the animals. Lovon, who seems lovely externally, whitewashing. Rivka grew up a rose among thorns, yet she overcame, and how a person can overcome.